This is the first video on micro, focusing on movement. An important aspect of micro is that it's trained through practice. Unlike macro, where understanding the concepts allows you to immediately apply them and be effective, you will need to build muscle memory and habit out of micro. So don't get frustrated if you don't see immediate improvements. Everything I talk about in this video, you can practice in the Milliastra lobby as long as the ground is flat. However, it is important to actively practice in your games to see results. For movement, let's start with the basics. By default, you move in this running state, which is not very fast. Right-clicking or pressing Shift lets you dash. If you don't hold it, you'll go back to running state, but if you do hold it, you will transition into a sprint, which is signified by a burst of white lines that surrounds you as you sprint, and when you enter it from a dash, you'll see a puff of white air trailing behind you. There is an internal cooldown on dashing. If you do a second dash within 0.8 seconds, as you can see, I'm mashing the right click button. You can't dash again. This lockout window lasts for roughly 1 second. You generally don't want to get locked out from dashing, but if you do, you should enter the lockout in sprint state so that you're sprinting in lockout at least instead of slowly running. If you fire a bow, you will always leave that sprinting state. This is also true if you do a jump shot. If you try to fully reverse the direction you're sprinting in, you will also leave a sprint state, like this. However, you can work around this by briefly inputting a movement to the side, which will allow you to make 2 sprinting 90-degree turns, and thus remain sprinting. The other basic movement building block is jumping. Pressing space causes you to jump, which causes you to be airborne for about 0.6 seconds. Jumping preserves your sprinting state. If you jump while sprinting, you'll continue sprinting when you land, and you can see this by the white lines. Jumping while moving is faster than simply moving in that direction, both when you're dashing, sprinting, and simply running. However, because you can't change direction in mid-air, jumping is a commitment. This can leave you vulnerable if there are arrows coming at you. This means that there's also a risk-reward calculation that needs to be made. Jumping is going to be part of the fastest movement, but you might not want to be jumping when there are arrows coming at you. Now, let's talk about the main movement options that combine dashing, sprinting, and jumping. The fastest movement is dash jumping. As the name implies, you just dash and you jump. You generally will want to delay your jump for a little bit after you dash. This is because the dash cooldown is 0.8 seconds, and a jump takes 0.6 seconds. So you want to time roughly 0.2 seconds after your dash before jumping. This allows you to chain these dash jumps together. If you jump too early, then you will hit the dash cooldown. There's a variant of the dash jump which we'll call the sprint jump, where you wait until you see the sprint puff appear behind you before you do your jump. This can also be chained together because you will not be able to hit your dash cooldown. This is also important for the next movement option that I'm going to talk about, which is bunny hopping, or b-hopping for short. When you're in sprint state, you can chain jumps into each other since a jump maintains your sprint. It is slightly slower than dash jumping, but it's about as fast as sprint jumping. However, this movement is often riskier because you're staying airborne for longer, and movement is usually more predictable. One big advantage of bunny hopping is that you can perfectly pivot when you land. So as you can see here, you can reverse your direction very fast. This makes this movement ideal for tagging your block spawner, where the risk of getting hit by an arrow is lower, and you might need to reverse your movement anyway as you're coming back. So let me get sprint state actually showcase this movement. If there are no arrows in flight that can punish you, You can also use it to build the end of your bridge. One movement option that combines all of the above is the double dash, double bhop. The idea is that you put your dashes on cooldown, and then you fill up the 1 second dash cooldown timer by hopping twice. This is overall about as fast as dash jumping, but it's riskier in that you're front loading a lot of the speed of the movement, and then you have a riskier window where you have no dash and you're jumping predictably. The main use for this movement is in the first few cycles in the early game, where you might want to dash the bridge, dash back, then refill your blocks. And as you can see, this distance is perfectly suited for the double dash, double bhop. Another common use case is when you're building a long bridge. If you want to spend the minimum amount of time out here, which is risky, once my blocks are placed, I might double dash back, and then spend the dash cooldown with a double jump. Now, let's talk about how to apply these options in practice. The goal of efficient movement is accomplished by moving the smallest distance possible using the fastest option that covers that distance. You can build a bridge from around 2 blocks away, as I'll showcase here. So I walk forward slowly. Roughly, this 2 block gap is where you can build. Additionally, you can pick up the blocks from the block spawner without going through the brick. Roughly, it's around where this inner line that's adjacent to the edge is located. So the most efficient movement will involve tagging the spawner about as close to this edge as possible, and then building roughly 2 blocks away. Once you have 6 block or 10 block, then you'll have to extend further down the bridge, because if you want to place all of your blocks, you might have to touch the exact end of the bridge to place all of them. Now, I'm often very formulaic with my movement in the entirety of the early game, and I'll simply pick a movement option based on how long my bridge is. As I mentioned earlier, at game start, I will use a lot of double dash, double bhop, because the spacing is perfect for doing that movement. I didn't mess it up right there. And this is pretty good for the first few cycles, especially if you're not at great risk of getting shot. If you see arrows in flight, you might have to mix it up a little bit. Then, once your bridge has reached a certain length, I will often use 1 dash hop forward, then do the double dash, double bhop back. And then I will vary it and use simple sprint jumps into bhops once the bridge gets long enough, because that covers the best amount of distance. Once I reach about this point, the bridge is built long enough, and I'll probably have 70 gold to buy 10 blocks at this point. Now, once you reach 10 blocks and replace all of them, you're going to have to touch all the way to the end of the bridge. So the movement options become a little bit more varied, but you'll also have to be careful about shots coming in. At this point in the game, I'll usually transition to mostly just doing dash jumps, and sometimes mixing in sprint jumps if I need to do a bunny hop afterwards. Alright, that covers most of it for bridge battle movement. In the next video, I'll cover one advanced movement option that takes advantage of some quirks in block placement in order to stay safer while building long bridges. I'll catch you in the next one.